Thank you all for being here. This is the 16th annual Litchfield Tea and Poetry series here at the Waccamaw Library in Pawleys Island. So it's a long-running series, and we've had some great folks, great poets join us here. We've got another one today, as well as an open mic session. And we're grateful to our friends of the Waccamaw Library, or FOWL, and which is appropriate, especially today, with our speaker, Drew Lanham, a wonderful birder, an ornithologist. So he knows a lot about birds, but we have a different kind of bird back there, our FOWL symbol, Friends of the Waccamaw Library. If you're not a member of FOWL, please join up. Our friends are quite friendly. They keep us going. They made this program possible, and all our other programs here, not just adult programs, children's, teen programs. So they keep us going, and they're very nice people. And also back there, while you're signing up or getting information from the table there, you can take your cameras out and take a snapshot of some of the other programs coming up, including our next session for the Litchfield Tea and Poetry series coming up in April on the third Thursday, where we'll celebrate National Poetry Month, and we'll have the wonderful she's a local treasure, but not just a local treasure, but Libby Bernadine, who happens to be with us today. She'll be reading, as well as Glennis Redmond, a great poet from up in the upstate from Greenville. So please join us again for that, as well as a lot of other programs coming up. In addition to our friends sponsoring this today, the series this year is supported by South Carolina Humanities, which is a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. So we're grateful for their support. And today we welcome Edgefield native Drew Lennon, a celebrated, widely published author and wildlife biologist. His books include the award-winning memoir, The Home Place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature, from Milkweed in 2017, and the poetry prose collection Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts, from Hub City Press in 2021, that wonderful press up in Spartanburg, South Carolina. His writing has been published in venues including Orion, Audubon, Flycatcher, and Wilderness, and in several anthologies. As alumni distinguished professor of wildlife ecology at Clemson University, Dr. Lanham's research focuses on songbird ecology and the African American role in natural resource conservation. A major poet of Southern ecology and wildlife, especially bird life, Lanham gracefully intertwines his scientific pursuits and gives these lyric resonance. His honors include, a partial list of his honors include the National Audubon Society's Dan W. Lufkin Prize for Environmental Leadership in 2019, and the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Award for Outstanding Science Advocacy in 2020. Dr. Lanham is active on several conservation boards, including South Carolina Wildlife Federation, Audubon South Carolina, and the American Birding Association. So in short, we could give him, present him today with one of those t-shirts that says, "I'm kind of a big deal." But he's a gloriously humble person and writer and professor, so he would refuse to wear it, but he is, in fact, kind of a big deal. And so we're thrilled to have him here with us today for the Litchfield Tea and Poetry session. So please help me welcome Drew Lanham up here today. Oh, that's okay. That's why the carpet is brown.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much for those kind words. Thank you all for being here. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is, I have this history with Georgetown going way back, and that's my Marco Rubio imitation there. Way back to a big change in my life when I finally escaped from engineering, right? And I always tell people, and I escaped from engineering. I'm glad that the people passionate about engineering didn't escape from it, because you want passion in your work. But I was passionless about engineering. I was okay at it. But you don't want okay people designing bridges. You don't want okay people designing helicopter rotors, right, Wendell? So I got this job, my first year in zoology, with Gail Noblet, and she was studying, y'all know what spaghetti worms are? Amphitrite ornata. And she said, I'm gonna need you to go down to this place called Hobcaw, to Baruch, and dig these worms out of the sand. And I would come down once a month and stay, a friend and I would stay for a few days, and we would dig these spaghetti worms out of the pluff, really. And that's how I came to know Georgetown. But that was back in 1986. And so that was the beginning of the relationship here. And so it always feels there's a familiarity that birds have in migrating over landscapes. They come to know them over time in ways that maybe we can't imagine birds knowing landscapes. But coming back last night, I was telling my friends Wendell and Kathy Peacock that as we drove, even in the dark, and my caffeine was only kicking in on the final leg of the trip, that I could recognize things even as much as things have changed. Even as absent as we've been for the past 2-3 years from one another as social human beings, that there's a familiarity that is here. And so I hope that some of my poetry today reflects that. Some of it you'll hear will come from Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts. And my friend Bill Wilkinson and his wife Libby are here, who know so much about bird life. But part of what you'll hear me sharing is a little further down the coast. I spend a lot of time in the Ace Basin. So let me back up a little bit. We vacationed here for a lot of years. My kids got introduced to the ocean on Litchfield, because this is the first place that we started vacationing, right? And so at first we could afford like 3 days on this little back place, and we got all excited because there was a little pond back there, and there was a gator. And it was crazy because the kids could look out and they could see a gator, but then we had to travel around all the way around to get to the beach. But those were special times. Special times when your children and your family comes to learn a place. And this is where they came to know the ocean. This is where they came to know the ocean. So this is called The Island I Am. And this was written, I think it could apply in a lot of places. But the island I am, sitting here insular. Really though, I'd like to exercise the superlative of that state. To be on more of an island, maybe a smaller island, a more away island, somehow be further away from all the hate, all the hypocrisy. Sitting here looking at the ocean water churned muddy brown in St. Helena, sending enough sand shoreward each second for me to push my head shoulder deep into it until the successive comings and goings of the tide bury me like all the flotsam and shells that have ever come before. Pour upon and bury me until the deafening report of gunfire killing black people praying and dog whistles sound-bitten lies of history and not hate cease, until the empty prayers for school children shot cowering under desks and heedless hopes of do-nothings who can't even agree that the sun rises and sets are muffled into surf and gull laughter and dolphins blowing. I can only escape this den for a moment while looking at some bird or wandering away on my own to lose now in what's better to maybe never come. In the second of seeing feather flashing or searching for the answer on a lettered olive shell, I don't have to look at anything else. I don't have to think. But then I come back to the mainland of reality. I blink back from staring at wing beats or beak shape or plumage hue. My fool's exercise in false escapism gives me just enough clarity and sanity to exist until it's my turn or someone I know, because I can still hear it from this island. It is close to every one of us, everywhere. Whether here or center of mainland connected, no matter where I am, no matter where we are, it is here. The unceasing headwind, the expanse of featureless sea with no horizon to swim for. I can hear it from every place I have ever been or could think of being. Wildness is no cure for inhumanity's blight of cruelty exacted because of skin color or who we love or the language we speak. I don't think there's a place to flee. There's no away that's far away enough anymore to ever be insulated or safe. Maybe hopelessness is an island unto itself. Maybe hope is the sandbar somewhere out there where Wimbrel and oyster catchers rest. I need to find that place, that piece of isolation, that piece of reality estate. So, this place means a lot to me. The coast means a lot to me. The ocean, in sort of the ceaseless way that it's constantly coming and going, no matter what's going on. No matter what's going on. It never stops. And so it brings this whole idea of, well, persistence, of course. But then I spend a lot of time, my favorite shell is the lettered olive. So I write a lot about lettered olives. Who would ever think, right? Of all of the shells. But then you come to recognize when you're walking the beach and there are certain things in certain places, you begin to imagine what the ocean floor looks out beyond you that you can never see. And so there are certain places where they are evident. And so this is called want. And then I wanted to save each grain of sand from the surging sea, to stop each wave in its never-ceasing pace, to find the next most beautiful shell, to capture memory in new-spun dew-wet webs, to have the fiddlers slow their scuttling, come above ground to serenade the hatchling sun, to bid the painted bunting splash his plumage palette across a canvas of bright green marsh grass, and urge the loggerhead to hurry up before the ink black left the sky. I wanted it all. Sun and moon, surf, shells, shooting stars, bunting song. Every single grain of sand. But then the wind shifted. The tide rose, and there was the sudden knowing of nothing else to come or be, that within a blink or two, Seconds would be centuries, where the live oaks gave up living and the hanging moss fell, except for the wishing. All of this would be gone. So this book, I want to give credit to my bestie John Lane, a friend that Dan and I know well. John Lane is, I call him the poet laureate of the Piedmont. I think he's the poet laureate of rivers, especially of South Carolina rivers, but maybe of all rivers. I decided this morning, I'm poet laureate of Edgefield, proudly so, but really, and I will tell you this, and I hope that you will support me. The first poet laureate of South Carolina, there's a test. Does anybody know who that is? It's Archibald Rutledge, but I'm lobbying for it to be David Drake. Does anybody know who David Drake is? David Drake is the Edgefield slave who was writing poetry on pots at the risk of his life, because you could be killed as a black slave, an enslaved person, for being literate. And here was this man writing poems on these big clay jugs, right? So if you ever hear it, sometimes you hear him called Dave the slave, but his name was David Drake. And so, poet laureates are important, but I decided this morning, I christened myself for the morning. I want to be, I call myself the analog of Paulie's. I'm the arrogantly Chevy poet. So this book that John Lane helped get on the board with his press, Holocene Press. We're now in the Anthropocene, right? The original book was called Sparrow Envy Poems, and then Meg Reed at Hub City Books, that's a wonderful, wonderful publisher in Spartanburg, South Carolina, offered me the opportunity to do more with the book, and so that's where this came from. Sparrow Envy, Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts. So I'll share a little bit from here, and lesser beasts are anything that's not a bird. So humans are lesser beasts when compared to birds, right? Mm-hmm. So I do a lot of things. Among them, one of my favorite is deer hunting. And a lot of people can't figure out how could you hunt deer? How could you love something and maybe kill it? You'll never hear me call killing an animal harvesting. I mean, that's a demeaning thing to me. But my dream, and in my will, is for my ashes to be scattered in forest, hopefully under an oak, where ultimately my molecules, my atoms, become acorns that the deer then get to consume. Deer worship. My deer stand is a tower of self-diagnosis, a tall temple of introspection, where I see more clearly in the graying dark of lingering night than in desk-bound inflorescence. I climb a pine and leave responsibility behind and expectation on the ground to look out into a realm of wildness that is more mirror than any hanging on walls. There are no promises to break or contracts to breach, except those bargained alone to be fully in whatever moment comes. I can see clearly the red-tailed hawk rising on unseen hope. A gray fox finds fall's fortune under a persimmon tree, but I know the sweeter luck lies in me. The rut-blind buck with nose to ground and whitetail wagging to the sky focuses intentions on willing does and making more of his kind. Whether I watch in envy of his freedom or lay crosshairs heart lung high is never simple math. There's a free will and ultimate choice. It is paradise, it is heaven, nirvana, and Brigadoon with a bit of rabbit hole thrown in. All eyewitness is worthy of worship. Wild things are not burdened with guilt or sin. My dear stand is prayer and meditation and godless pleas thrown as alms and ash into the autumn wind. It is a counseling couch with no limits on listening. Sparrows offer free advice on seed searching. My deer stand is downward facing dog and genuflection. A supplicating place where time is the rare commodity sought and patience the only cost. I watch sun and moon rise, circle, and rest without rewinds or resets. In my tree, commandments don't come in 10, just one. Be. So again, it is a, seeing things from a bird's eye view as a child. Does everybody know where Edgefield is? Well, I'll tell you this. Okay, so first of all, Edgefield is where you get real peaches. Don't believe the hype and gaffing. Honestly, and don't believe the big peachoid. It's a trap. If you want real good peaches, you go to Edgefield on that ridge, on that sandy ridge. Edgefield sits on the fall line, so part of it, the part where I'm from, is really more like the upstate, almost mountainous with hollers and the like. You go down on the ridge, that's old coastal plain, and that's where the really sweet peaches are. But part of what I do is, we've talked in a couple of poems, I've talked about the ocean and sort of time, and sort of this abstraction of time. And then a place that's, I know there's some of you here who spend time in deer stands. And it takes a different thing to get out of a warm bed next to a warm body and to then go out in the cold and the dark and climb up a tree. But it is a real thing, right? It's a real thing, and I always want people to see hunting as more than some sort of bloodlust, and I think it's important for us as South Carolinians to really understand sort of the culture of it and what drives it. I'm successful roughly 1 out of 10 times I go deer hunting, and so I have to eat other things besides the deer that I eat. I don't hunt anything that I don't eat. But I also watch things like ants. And this is a poem that I've not read very much, but I like it a lot because it tells the story of an ant on something that I happen to kill, and it took us a while to consume. It's called Buffalo Trace, not the bourbon. I watched an ant trek across the landscape of a bison skull, antennae wavering in wonder at the expanse of great plainness. It seemed a dry, hard place to be, a desert of dead bone with fissured canyons, channels, dark chasms, emptied of cow eyes that once rolled wild, but void now, plunging down into an empty cavern where a bovine brain sat once, remembering, perhaps, ancestors uncountable on two-toed feet. The intrepid hymenopteron traced the narrow rims of these sockets, scaled the peak of horn as if it were an ant Everest. Could it be that 6 legs makes the wandering any easier? Do its ant ears catch the echoes of herds past? Can it sense the thundering rumble under each little foot? The tumbling of a band over a cliff to its death, in and out, up and down. The tiny traveler made its way across the abysmal plain to parts unknown, packing nothing more than what ants carry on such expeditions. No cut leaves or sugar grains on board now seemed a heavy enough load for its half-dozen limbs, or my 4. So that was a bison, believe it or not, that I killed in Kodiak, Alaska, coming off the beach eating kelp. It's an odd story of how bison are historic, have been a part of the Alaskan landscape. But this was a particularly odd sort of experience to be on Kodiak. The rest of that herd now rests with some indigenous peoples there. But again, I think part of the poet's job is we're always looking inward. I think even as we see landscapes and the world or time, but that the poet's sensibility brings us back to the data that we know best, which is self. Well, most days I know self, okay. Some days it doesn't work out as well. All right, so birds. I want to read this about thrushes because thrushes are favorite birds of mine. I write about olive shells, which are, for me, hard to find. I don't know, somewhere I dream that there's a mother lode of olive shells, just all piled up, right? And that I would sit and try to interpret them. Thrushes are sort of like lettered olives in that thrushes are these brown-backed birds that can be difficult to see. Now, bluebirds are also thrushes. There's your ornithology lesson. Bluebirds are also thrushes. Robins are thrushes. But the thrushes I'm speaking of are these brown-backed things like Swainson's thrushes and wood thrushes and hermit thrushes that are with us all winter. This is called thrush lust. A thrush would rather you have it in pieces. Eye for purple berry, tawny throat, dawn's first hidden shadow. Moss olive, brown back, blending fawn spotted breast into dappled evening light, tumbled through September's fatigue, green, failing. It is a jigsaw puzzled thing until a ripening want calls, hangs, tempts. Hidden form reveal cannot resist what begs taking, is whole until the mystery thinks better of what it knows itself to be. A secret whisper on night wind fades quiet into imagining. Fragments scattered to past tense. A hushed wish, unbelieved. Because thrushes are sort of, they're here, then they're not. Until, you have the fortune of maybe seeing this brown thing that sort of skirts from under a bush, or tragically, under your window, there's this brown body. Life cut short by what we call progress. All right, I think I'm going to share a couple of short poems here, and Dan, you'll let me know when my time is up. But some of these things I look at when I look at my poems, and some of you know Miho Kinas, the poet from Beaufort, who just did a workshop on haiku and haibun, I believe. And one of the things that I have my students do, Dan asks, are you still teaching? People ask all the time, are you retired? Not yet. And I still teach ornithology, but one of the ways that I try to teach it is to have students concentrate something into 17 syllables, which is one of the traditional forms of haiku. It's not as tight as that all the time, but and I'm not sure. I look at these and I'm sitting here trying to count as I talk, and my brain can't do two things at once. So these are some couple of short poems. Silent sound. So the first idea is silent sound. St. Helena sound is a mostly silent place, save the gull's laughter. Flipping horseshoe. St. Helena gives by tide, she takes by time, life for death, Devonian for now. And that, everyone's seen a horseshoe crab. What caught me was this one horseshoe crab. And horseshoe crabs, by the way, I always say that every policy begins with personal agenda. Please vote in favor of the horseshoe crabs, whatever you do. I will say no more than that. But when you have a chance to vote for horseshoe crabs, vote for horseshoe crabs. So this horseshoe crab, I'm walking the beach and there's this huge horseshoe crab that's flipped and it's trying to right itself. And not far from it was like this 3-foot, I think it was a sand shark, but dead. It had been caught by someone and probably just left up there. But I watched all these people walk past this horseshoe crab, and they would look at it, and then just keep going. And I just wondered. I mean, and I try not to be judgmental about people walking, because that's sort of like, oh well, when do you stop? What stops you? What gives you pause? But they just kept walking past this struggling, prehistoric creature. Who knows how old it was or could have been, or how many eggs it could produce or fertilize, and then how many red knots it would have helped save. Because our red knots, guess what? Our red knots on this coast, especially down in the Ace Basin, they don't go up to the mid-Atlantic. They go straight to the Arctic, over the Blue Ridge. The science shows us that. So all of that comes to mind when I think of some of these short poems, and what I want them to do is ultimately to reflect both that inward and that outward spiral. This was inspired by an eggshell. So this time of year, how many people have had Carolina wrens hatch? Easter bluebirds are coming close, so you'll begin to see fragments of eggshells around, right? Egg blues. Nature versus nurture, or so the dichotomy allegedly goes. The hardwired instinct of our base being blamed on genes, while the learning, the exposure of our surrounding casts shadows on our gnarled and twisted family trees. Who takes care of whom? Knows the itches to scratch, can find the place where you retreat within your own wildness to escape, but leave you there trusting you'll return. The right or wrong questions to ask. It's all a matter of timing, the who and what of our whenness. The birds find their own answers to these questions, simply living by codes we can't quite figure out, except to guess, really. I'm okay with not knowing it all these days. 5 cerulean eggs laying warm in a cup fashioned of pine straw and rootlets wound just so are proof of my human-built conceit. Who taught them this? The old box hung tenuously on a fence post with no roof, dangerously exposed. Evidence of some bluebird genius faith, unmeasurable by us? Or is it some sign of persistence? Maybe an ill-fated nesting move? The choice has been made beyond my ego grade, and so for today I'll just take it as a sign of Cyalia Cialis love. I move on to watch a sparrow throw its head back and sling its buzzy song into the morning wind. All of the questions I never answered just moments ago have just begun again. So I like the whole idea of not knowing, because that's job security for scientists, because then we're trying to know, right? We're trying to find out. But there are some things that I think that we can never know. and maybe the thing that we can never know, is actually what a bird is thinking. You know, for all the research that we can do, and we've done a lot of it, it comes to this point of having to wonder, what did this bird think? I mean, have you ever wondered what your dog was thinking or your cat was thinking? Cats. You know, we just had this conversation about cats. I mean, ultimate poker faces, right? But that not knowing, again, is part to me of what poetry allows us to do. Poetry allows us to put words out there that, yeah, express or describe something perhaps, but then in between the lines of poetry is interpretation. What we think we might know from what the writer put down, but frequently part of the art of poetry to me is writing in between the lines or leaving the unwritten between the written lines. And in doing that, it's important to hear. So we read poetry, but then you hear it. And so to hear the author say his, her, or their words, to hear it in an accent, to hear emotion, right? I think it is important. So I have these things called field marks in sparrow envy. And the field mark is something obviously that you use to identify a bird. But in this book, the field marks are sort of just observations, mostly. This is field mark 73, how to just be. Real world means inside obligations to tend to. Widget making, deadlines pressing, bills always due. More and more, four walls feels like a trap, a cage with no escape. Not being out, not wandering somewhere wild seems sinful. There's something wonderful that I'm not witnessing. Some bird or beast flies or creeps by as I stare into someone else's expectational chasm. It's an expanse I'm increasingly unwilling to span. A new sun warms in brilliant hues. The same tiring orb sinks into the abysmal blue. When that coming and going cycles, absent my first-hand witness, I'm squandering time. If wildness is a wish, then I'm rubbing the lamp hard for a million more wandering moments. So a lot of what has come in the past couple of years, you know, I'll tell you, I sat in the backyard a lot in the early days of COVID. It was warming up, things were greening up, the birds from the south were coming up, and I was down. Lots of us were down, right? And so birds were really inspiration for me. I mean, as these birds from all over the new world were coming up, they brought me a kind of hope in this way. So there was a lot of poetry written sort of sitting at this table waiting for the next Zoom call as the birds zoomed by. And so, you know, inspiration for me comes from the faraway places and thinking about something like an ant on a bison skull that came from Kodiak, Alaska. But then I love the nearby. I call it the nearby far away. So to have this idea of things that bring space close to heart. So how do I count days? Here today, and this was on EIT, Edisto Island time. And I'm glad, I'm happy for the unanimous consent in the Senate, right, to go to permanent daylight savings time. I'm really, really happy about that. But when I'm on an island, I have my own time. This is called Edisto Island time. A day formerly known in the human habit of nonstop clock keeping called Wednesday I choose now instead in my soul cycle for it to be Wimbrel. Sunrise on Wimbrel occurred a little past 4 Wimbrel, flying past fast over low tide salt marsh. Pelican surf soaring marked 7ish, and 7:30 a.m. or somewhere thereabouts was painted bunting perched on dead oak and warbling. At almost 8ish was 3 great egret and dead pine time. Now it is whenever it is. I'm sure someone has an hour and minute hand pegged, a date on their calendars for me planned. That will have to wait. Excuse me, please, I'm running late for Blue Grosbeak singing in Spent Sunflower Field. Must loiter somewhere else a bit longer. So again, time, it's something that it seemed to me, at points in time it stood still. It just stood still. And day after day of watching and waiting, and we had the fortune of being able to, in the second year, to get back to Edisto. But I bring it back to this place and all the time that I've spent on Hobcaw, and even back to that time spent and even understanding what Pluff was. I got to know it real good when I got stuck in it, right? So it's a lifetime of experience doing the science, but then also trying to get, so the science that's here, but trying to get the science from here to here. So that ultimately people are saying, you know what, this is worth working for. This is worth saving. And I think about all the work that you've done, Phil and Libby. Phil, how many years? I mean, decades.
50 years. 45.
45.
Yeah.
So when you think about all that time, you could concentrate that time into really a bird, not even flocks of birds, but one bird that you see that makes you lighter on a given day, that makes you maybe forget your problems for a little bit. Or maybe it concentrates them in a way that you say, you know what, I want to do something to make the world better past this. So that's what poetry has been for me, and I try to write most things with a poet's sensibility. And what's a poet's sensibility? To me, it's the idea of the lyrical. So lyricism, it's the idea of really, it shouldn't be overcooked. Sometimes it's got to be, words tartar. Sometimes it's on the hoof, right? But poetry is never done. It's never done. It's just always practice. So, if you, I'm constantly editing it as I read it. I'm thinking about it differently. And then when I read it, though, it brings back some memory of a time or a place. And I think about all that time here. I think about
65 years.
65?
Yes. I just had to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, but that time, right? It's easy to lose that time.
Yeah.
And it's been easier over the past couple of years to lose time and not being able to see dear friends like Kathy and Wendell for, you let that go and you're like, wait a minute. And then you come back and my grandmother used to talk about rapture, right? And I realized that part of my poet sensibility came from my grandmother. Look, you probably got a problem is if you, I learned to read in Revelations.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, but part of what I also learned was sort of this idea of metaphor and how to, hopefully how to tell a story that doesn't scare you to death, but gets you thinking or maybe feeling in some sort of way. So I want to leave room here for Phil because I know he has a poem or two that he wants to share. So I'm looking forward to hearing that. But I'm grateful to FOWL. That's You know what? I hope that's on a t-shirt somewhere, because I will wear that t-shirt. That's just absolutely wonderful. But thank you again for having me here today, to come back down to a place that puts sand and pluff and salt into this Piedmont soul. So thank you.
Drew, would you answer a question or two
Oh, yeah, sure,
and then we'll shift over to our open mic. But does anyone have you had so much inspiring material there, both the poems, but also your words in between and your stories. Any questions out there, folks?
Yes.
I think that you should advertise the incredible bird watching exhibit at the Mango House. I've been there 3 times.
Oh, bless you.
Wonderful. And I saw your garden gone, but I haven't had any drinks at the Drewberry. I probably should.
You know what? Thank you. Your name?
Cynthia.
Cynthia, thank you so much. If you go down to the Manigo House, right across from the Charleston Museum, Kelly S. Turner, who's the curator and really brains behind the exhibit of me and a couple of other artists, but the Charleston Museum has graciously allowed Kelly to bring over specimens, including ivory-bill woodpecker, Carolina parakeet, Bachman's warbler, into the Manigo House. Now the Manigos were a rice planter. So I always tell people, you know, and you think about Georgetown, and you think about the amount of rice that came out of Georgetown, but then when you think about the amount of rice, you also got to think about the amount of pain and labor that it took. You know, in one year, I think it was in the 1840s, there was a planter that cleared nearly $2 million in $1840. What amount would that be? So anyway, the Manigo House has this display. It'll be in until April 3rd. And so I'm going back down. I'll be at the Manigo House on Friday and Saturday. We're trying to memorialize it because once it's gone, and we want to make sure that it's in a book somewhere. So if you have, thank you, Cynthia.
It's an incredible exhibit.
It is, and so that whole house has been taken over by birds and poetry. The whole house, the Manigo House. And there are great drinks at the Dewberry that are named after birds. And a huge wood stork. Phil, the wood stork is the size of 50 wood storks. So if you have a chance to get there, check it out. Thank you, Cynthia. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for bringing up about being a deer hunter and being in the deer stand. My dad was a hunter all my life. And bringing up the aspect that it's not cruelty. Okay, to hunt deer. There's a different aspect to it if you've ever known someone who does that. So thank you for that. Thank
you. You know, it's the one thing and I miss it. And part of what's happened to hunting, quite frankly, I mean, there were bad hunters. Phil can tell you that. There were bad hunters out there who Phil helped bring to the law, but there were also TV has made us think that in 30 minutes, if you talk really quiet, and you have all the right equipment, that a deer weighing 6,000 pounds is going to present itself to you, and then you can go home. And that's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. And unfortunately, a lot of the young people that I teach think that.
Well, sometimes if you are in a family, sometimes that's the only way you have to eat.
Amen. And guess what? That Whole Foods market didn't cost like the other one. Right? So, you know, there's, I will tell you one of the, I'm sure I've been booed before, but one of the memorable moments was I was reading a poem about field dressing a deer. And somebody, and it was at a bird talk, and I was finishing up with that, and somebody booed. And that poem was not just about field dressing this deer, but it was about feeling the life in this deer, getting to that deer after I'd shot it, having my hand on that buck's shoulder, and still feeling, I don't know if you've ever been with a deer, an animal and felt its flesh quiver. And I field dressed that deer, and the poem was not just about the deer, but it was also about young black men dying in the streets, and how life has become so trivial to many that it's just another story. It could have been a story, it was a poem also about Sandy Hook. It was a poem about Columbine. It was a poem about, it wasn't just about that one deer that I'd killed. So people need to understand that if you eat meat, at some point in time it blinked or breathed. So thank you. Thank you.
Just quickly, I've been fascinated by the recent genetic research on birds, and especially by what appears to be either the evolution or de-evolution of hummingbirds from dinosaurs. Any reflections on that?
Yeah, some people, that's the only way they really deal with birds. Are like, oh, these are just dinosaurs. And you know, that whole idea of that connection is important. You know, I think, you know, I spend a lot of time on 23andMe trying to figure out who it is that I am. You know, the obvious Central and West African component, but then there's this Brit, there's this Irish, there's Southeast Asian, there's Native American, there's Neanderthal in there.
Yeah.
So, you know, with that genetic evidence, all we've done is sort of trace the lineage of these things. I would like to think at some point in time as a kid that when I paused for those commas in the puddle, the commas were tadpoles, I was looking at cousins, right? I was looking at distant relatives.
Yeah.
So I like to think that way about connection. But the idea of birds as dinosaurs is thrilling to me and to many people. It's how a lot of children have become interested, not just in science, but in seeing connection.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for those wonderful questions, and thanks again to Drew. That wonderful, wonderful job, and just great work that you keep doing on the page and off the page, obviously. So we're so thrilled to have you. And now we'd love to open this up for the open mic session for some folks, good souls out there to read a poem or two. I know we can always count on. Oh yeah, Paula, right? Yeah, come on up, Paula. Wonderful.
Thank you for having this. I look forward to the open mic every night, every year, rather going, oh, is it going to be soon? So thank you.
Sure.
I wrote this poem about 15 years ago. And I haven't really said it out loud much, because I always said I'll wait till both of my parents have passed away. It's called The Goddess. Athena, Hera, Aphrodite, Mary, and Patricia. Goddess is all. What is a goddess? Charm, beauty, form, strength. Charm. She was once a shy 16-year-old girl who met a dashing, swooningly handsome older man. He was 19. They dated, each charmed the other. It was 1942. The war raged. Their hormones raged. They married. 5 days later, he left to smash Hitler. 3 years passed. He came home. His charm replaced by alcohol. 9 months later, her charm is gone, replaced by the first baby's excess body fat she can't seem to shed. Beauty. Inner beauty, hidden from view by layers of fat, layers of shame, layers of revenge. layers of despair, layers of denigration at the hands of a cold, callous, selfish, uncaring husband. Form. Marred, maimed, mauled by birthing 6 children spaced so close together, her own youth stolen, strangled, stunted by stretch marks and too many cries in the night. Her tears mingled with theirs, can no longer tell who is in pain. Charm. Mutilated by cancer, breast cancer. Her charm hacked off by a sawbones, who only saw the money in the surgery. Didn't see the goddess. Only another piece of meat on the table, the keys to a new Ferrari, perhaps. Her flesh burnt and charred by the excessive radiation, heat emanating from the wound as she sat there in that goddamn turquoise Stratolounger. She can't lie down, too much pain. So she sits like a goddess, bears the pain, squeezes the rubber ball the lady from the American Cancer Society gave her. Must use it or forfeit the use of her arm.
What's his first name?
Over and over and over,
Write it down.
squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. The lymph nodes in the armpit, positive. She must regain mobility. Strength. Strength comes from bearing insults from your drunken husband about your weight, your form, your essence. Not enough. Not enough. Form. The goddess survives the cancer, but now must battle back the demons of heart failure. A broken heart. How fitting. Her form maimed yet again by gleaming scalpels. Pacemaker installation deemed a success by those who took the Hippocratic Oath, those who took her form. 1 year later, standing in line in front of the bank teller, a hot, humid, stifling August day, the pacemaker fails. The goddess is dead. Athena, Hera, Aphrodite speak to us across the ages, and so does my mother, the goddess known as Marian Patricia.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi. I'd like to dedicate this to one of my teachers, Gladstone Trotman III of Macon, Georgia, who showed me the river and light. I must have gotten a little strong vibe from you, Mr. Lanham, when I had written this. A good strong vibe, I called it Lessons. Gather ye, under the storms of war and sickness, they flow in with the air and waters and back out to the sea, where they lay for centuries, trying to tell us of what may be.
Thank you. All right. I know Libby always has a poem
Yep.
available.
I did.
Always.
Thank you, Hope. Drew, I wish I'd brought my poem about the thrush. It's I read this bit of information about a thrush that's so tiny, and it can fly from Nova Scotia to Argentina nonstop. I'm just struck by that, and I've been trying to read more and more about migration and writing about it, but as Phil can tell you, I'm no scientist, but I'll keep with it. Morning, like a time-lapsed flower, unbends from soil. Burst of resurrection fern from 3 days of rain. Spring's neat tide cleanses. Shorebirds hover, dine on what comes. Ridges deepen in yards, and black-eyed Susans unbend from soil. Raindrops from trees slather the blossom. Is it an owl's cry coming from the oak? Wind rouses stories that mar, like the trending noise of cars, of trucks. The knee on the neck, the god-awful truth of that. Even today, another and another and another. You know the names, the places. I'm not entitled to this peaceful morning, though dogwoods scent the air, raising the fine hair on my cheek. I step among moonflowers, listen to tree gossip, lilt of their talk. I watch owl unfold giant wings, fling toward prey. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make my way up there.
Yes, sir.
I had to think about all you talked about and the mysteries of it all, and looking at wildlife across my lifetime. I just think of it as all a miracle. That's all I can, the easiest way I can explain it. The whole thing is a miracle. Even the hunting, the feelings you have about that. You owe that animal his life or her life for food, which you have to have, that sort of thing. The miracle of all that. Anyway, I started my career about 65 years ago, and I'm still busy at 88. But I want to read a poem about how it all got started, which was way before that. About the time I was in the 7th grade, living on the Santee Delta, I had a neighbor that I called Daddy Ben. And we were very close at that time in my life, and he influenced me in the direction I wound up going. Let me use different glasses here. I can hardly see anything without them. This is called Daddy Ben. I see him in last light, shuffling down the moss-draped road with columns of oaks that block the stars. A once powerful man headed home, leading his companion Jim, a not long for this world ox, back from the North Santee River for the last of a twice-a-day drink. The signs of their watering place still there after so many years, as they made their way back home to a cypress shingled 2-room cabin with a centered fireplace, the only place for cooking inside. Daddy Ben and I ate at the warmth of that hearth many times. He gave me my first hound, one of 2 puppies he got off of old Trixie. Diamond and Queen, he named them. He gave me Diamond. He thought the male would be best for me. Together that hound and I learned to hunt. Were best friends in those twig-bending years. Was just one of the, I was just young enough to learn to track with a dog old enough to learn too. I figured Daddy Ben and I had many differences, him being dark and me light. I know now we didn't. We marked nearly 70 years apart in age. Not knowing his exact age, he gave me a hint by saying, "I've been born the year Mr. Lincoln been assassinated, and a grown man the year of the Big Shake, which was in 1886. That was a shake in Charleston. Our lives overlapped a span of 150 years. Through stories, he told me of the long ago time, about things like the Big Shake, and how places in the land open up and the plow field roll like big wind over big water, and he laid a pine flat on the ground. He told of hearing a political candidate at a stump meeting, greeting a crowd by saying, "Gentlemen." But when Governor Tillman stepped up to the podium, he says, "I came here to speak to you and can see what no two-eyed man can see. Ladies and gentlemen." And Daddy Ben loved to tell that story because he too was a one-eyed man who could see a boy that needed guidance, patience, and friendship. Time has gone by now. I'm about the age of Daddy Ben when we were friends. His old two-room shingle cabin is gone. Everything, the plowed fields, the road where his cabin once stood, have returned to forest. A few times I've made my way back there just to remember and appreciate how much he is still a part of who I am.
Anybody else out there with the poem?
Pardon?
Anybody else out there with the poem? No? Nobody? It's tough act to follow, those two. They're great ones. I'll read close off, I got a little one. It's a bird poem in honor of our honored guest here, but a short bird poem, but the heron flies the darkness down. So it's in the area around here, but it's got an epigraph from William Shakespeare's Hamlet. You know, Hamlet says, I'm mad, only north by northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. And a hawk is a carpenter's tool, like a handsaw, but it's also a bird. And a handsaw, there's a play. It can be a hensaw, which is a heron. And I know Drew knows the difference between a hawk and a heron flying, but I'm a little iffy on that. A lot of times I'm seeing a hawk and a turkey buzzard, I'm pretty confused, but you know, a heron and a hawk, if they're not too far away, I can tell the difference. But so this is kind of for Drew in honor of him. But a heron grazing shock white rears cruciform, slipping its own shadow. Its carriage glows bullion in the sun, seaward through bare claws of wind-sawed cedars, seared bone-white from salted floodwaters. Wingbeats saw across the road condos, luciform. It flies the darkness down, beyond worlds, worlds beyond, and farther. The sky clouded, the heron gone, just the memory of it held in water. Is that it? Just want to say thank you again to Drew for doing such a magnificent job and for coming down here. I know he's got many more stops to go along the coast, but we're glad to make him a friend of the library here. And thank you all for showing up. And come back next month and we'll see Libby Bernadine and Glennis Red again. But Thank y'all. We'll take out another.